By June 1942, Australia faced a serious threat from Imperial Japan's military power. The Japanese had made rapid advances in the South Pacific, endangering communication and supply routes between the United States and its allies. Airfields being built on the Solomon Islands, Guadalcanal, Tulagi, Florida, and Savo posed a direct risk. Japanese aircraft based there could potentially disrupt Allied bases in the New Hebrides, Fiji, and New Caledonia, possibly preventing any counterattack against Japan in the Pacific. Allied leaders were eager to strike back and identified Guadalcanal as a potential target. It was close to Allied positions, and the U.S. Navy began planning an amphibious assault to seize the airfield under construction. The island lay between the Japanese naval base at Rabaul on New Britain and Allied bases in the New Hebrides. Capturing Guadalcanal would allow the Allies to establish air superiority, secure communication lines with Australia, and prepare for future offensives toward New Guinea and the Bismarck Sea. Despite the importance of preparing for such a mission, historical accounts often overlook a key rehearsal conducted by the Navy just 10 days before the actual Guadalcanal invasion. This 4-day exercise took place off the coast of Cororo Island in Fiji at the end of July 1942. It receives only brief mention in official Navy and Marine Corps histories, and even prominent participants in the Guadalcanal campaign rarely refer to it. General Alexander A. Vandegrift, who led the Marine landing on Guadalcanal, made only a brief note in his autobiography. His assistant, Merrill Twining, mentioned planning aspects and some challenges like coral around the island, but did not detail the rehearsal itself. This limited attention likely reflects the fact that the rehearsal exposed significant flaws. The troops and commanders were clearly unprepared for amphibious operations, and their ability to carry out such missions was in doubt. The shortcomings may explain why the Navy and Marine Corps chose not to publicize the exercise after the war. In early July 1942, the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff issued a directive for offensive operations in the Southwest Pacific. The strategy called for the gradual capture of New Britain, New Ireland, and New Guinea. The campaign would begin with the seizure of Guadalcanal, then proceed to northern parts of the Solomons and New Guinea, before targeting Rabaul and other strategic bases. The Navy would lead the first phase and depend on the Marine Corps to provide landing forces. The 1st Marine Division, formed in 1941 and commanded by General Vandegrift, was chosen for the mission. The exercise revealed serious problems in logistics and coordination. Communication between ships and troops was weak, and there were not enough landing craft, particularly the new Higgins boats. Training conducted in 1941 at New River, North Carolina, had already highlighted issues in loading and unloading transports and delivering supplies to shore. Naval gunfire support and troop transport equipment were also found lacking. Few units in the 1st Marine Division had real experience with amphibious procedures. The only units involved in earlier training at New River and Solomons Island, Maryland, were the 5th Marine Regiment and the 1st Battalion, 1st Marine Regiment. The 7th Marine Regiment was not even present for the initial landing, as they had been reassigned to Samoa before relocating to New Zealand. The division, having been disbanded and reassembled several times since 1941, lacked both training and cohesion for the upcoming mission. Rear Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, director of the Navy's War Plans Division, rushed to finalize the invasion plan in early July with only 3 days' notice. This marked the Navy's first major offensive since the Spanish-American War. The plan, approved by Admiral Chester Nimitz and Admiral Ernest King, aimed to take Tulagi, the Santa Cruz Islands, and a strategic airfield on Guadalcanal's northern coast, which Japanese forces were building. Turner expressed concern about the inadequate preparation of the invasion force and stressed the need for a full-scale rehearsal involving air, sea, and ground forces. He received Nimitz's support, and the two agreed that such training was essential. The Fiji Islands, located 1,100 miles east of Guadalcanal, were selected for their security from enemy observation. The rehearsal was to begin on July 23rd and last 6 days, allowing 2 complete practice runs. To find a suitable landing site, General Vandegrift sent Captains Louis and C. and Major Donald Fuller to survey possible locations. They conducted air and ground inspections and consulted with British authorities in Fiji. Based on advice from American and British contacts, Cororo Island, a wedge-shaped mountainous island 100 miles northeast of Suva, was recommended, even though it wasn't on the original list. The officers believed they had surveyed the site at low tide. Encouraged by their British hosts and pressed for time, they recommended Cororo despite observing that the island was encircled by a large coral reef, which raised concerns. Fuller and his team presented this recommendation to Vandegrift and Admiral Turner on July 15th. Turner, recently appointed to command the South Pacific Amphibious Forces and oversee the operation he had helped plan, had just arrived in the theater. Although Fuller and his aides described Cororo as a poor and unsuitable location, they had no better alternatives. Turner responded that time was short and they would proceed with the rehearsal at Cororo. In hindsight, Turner's decision may have been flawed, but at the time, he was working with limited time and shifting circumstances. Originally, the rehearsal was set for July 23rd, with the actual Guadalcanal assault planned for August 1st. However, bad weather and shiploading issues delayed the 1st Marine Division's departure from Auckland, putting the invasion timeline at risk. To maintain the schedule, the rehearsal was moved to July 28th. With the assault now slated for August 7th. Agreements with the British colonial authorities in Fiji were completed, and in late July, about 966 residents, half the local population, were relocated from the north side of Cororo. Task Force 62, commanded by Turner, included 19,000 ground troops from the 1st Marine Division, 22 transport ships, 2 fire support groups with cruisers and destroyers, and 3 aircraft carriers with their squadrons of fighters and bombers. This group was to conduct a 4-day pre-invasion exercise from July 28th to July 31st, involving 72 ships. Landing assignments were made with the 1st and 3rd Battalions of the 5th Marine Regiment and the 1st Marine Regiment landing on Red Beach. The 1st Raider Battalion, the 2nd Battalion of the 5th Marines, and the 2nd Battalion of the 2nd Marine Regiment landed on Blue Beach. The 1st Parachute Battalion disembarked on Green Beach. These beaches measured 1,600 yards, 500 yards, and 150 yards wide, respectively. Vice Admiral Frank J. Fletcher, who had commanded naval forces at the Battle of the Coral Sea, ordered the exercise to begin at 9 a.m. on July 28th. Troops would land that day and be recovered the next, repeating the cycle on July 30th and 31st. The exercise involved 2 phases. 36 wooden Higgins boats, along with 30-foot X-boats and ramp boats, were launched from transports stationed 8,000 yards off Cororo's north shore. Each carried 3 crew members and 36 Marines, the latter weighed down with 70 pounds of gear. The boats circled about 500 yards from their transport ships before forming waves for the beach assault. 5 waves, spaced 5 minutes apart, moved to a departure line about 3,500 yards south, midway to the beaches. The rehearsal, named Operation Dovetail, marked the first large-scale amphibious training for the Navy and Marine Corps. By 2 p.m., the landing craft reached the departure line, already 1.5 hours behind schedule. The slow Higgins boats still needed 20 more minutes to reach shore. Delays annoyed leadership, but a more serious problem soon emerged. The Americans didn't realize the exercise had begun at low tide, revealing large coral formations under the surface. As the boats neared Red Beach, many struck the coral. With a 2-foot draft, the loaded Higgins boats had their propellers hit the reef. About 100 yards from the beach, many boats stopped and ordered Marines to disembark. This forced them into deep water, leading to panic and near drownings as many struggled to stay afloat. Some boats managed to cross the reef, unloading troops directly on shore or in shallow water. The scene at the coast was chaotic, with Marines and damaged boats scattered across the area. The 3rd Battalion of the 5th Marines landed just 50 yards from shore, but were far from their designated landing point, about 1,800 yards off target. Meanwhile, the follow-up units of the 1st Marine Regiment were arriving offshore. Just as they were preparing to land, visual signals were sent to abort the landing and return to the transports. As the boats pulled back, they passed vessels carrying artillery units and other Marine detachments that missed the signal. These troops landed on shore without support and spent the night without food, shelter, or communication. Between 2:30 and 3:30 p.m., the waters between Cororo and the transports were in disarray. The last Higgins boat returned around 6:30 p.m. Many support units never made it off their ships due to poor loading and embarkation procedures. The operation was halted before these issues could be resolved. Lieutenant Jack Clark, of the troop transport Fuller, acting as beachmaster at Red Beach, noticed the extent of damage to the landing craft. Seeing hull damage and disabled boats, he contacted Captain P.S. Spice aboard the Fuller to report the situation, raising concerns about depleted spare parts and the potential impact on the real Guadalcanal assault. Shortly after his report, a boat from the flagship Macaulay arrived to assess the situation. The flagship's radio operator had relayed Clark's report to Admiral Turner and General Vandergrift. Staff officers sent ashore confirmed the extent of the chaos and damage, convincing Turner and Vandergrift to cancel the remainder of that day's drills. Around the same time, Turner learned that even more boats were disabled by mechanical failures. One transport alone had 12 unusable boats. The next day, Clark was informed that Turner had appointed him beachmaster for the actual Guadalcanal invasion, acknowledging the critical importance of his intervention. While landings at Blue Beach went relatively smoothly, the operation at Red Beach was nearly a disaster. The units were only about 20 minutes apart in their landings, yet the outcome on each beach was drastically different. Many of the men had to wade the final distance to shore after disembarking 200 yards offshore. The other landing forces at Blue Beach arrived at Cororo 2 hours later, but the Coral also forced them to cross wide shallows, trudging through knee-deep water for hundreds of yards. At Green Beach, the 1st Parachute Battalion closed in on its target as planned, but like the other landing areas, coral heads damaged boat hulls and propellers, especially at Nola Point, the main Green Beach site. Marines meant to stay on Cororo lacked adequate food and shelter as night fell. Defying orders, they looted abandoned local homes and gathered pigs and poultry left behind by the residents, all without any supervision from officers or non-commissioned officers. Security at camp was almost non-existent, and illegal fires were set along the beaches to cook the animals. Colonel Leroy Hunt, commander of the 5th Marine Regiment, was unable to control the disorderly behavior or enforce discipline that night on Red Beach. The plan was to retrieve the Marines who had landed on Cororo on July 28th by the next day. The 2nd Battalion, 2nd Marine Regiment, was also supposed to land on Green Beach and carry out an attack on a designated target before being brought back to its transport. However, Admiral Turner revised the plans after exercises were canceled midway through on the 28th. He directed the Marines from the 2nd and 5th Regiments and the Raiders, who had stayed overnight on Cororo, to re-embark in the morning. Elements of the 11th Marine Regiment were ordered to board landing craft, approach Red Beach to within 2,000 yards, and then return to their ships after the others had re-embarked. The landing of the 2N battalions of the 2nd Marines on Green Beach was canceled. Turner's concern was preserving the limited number of Higgins boats from further damage. All troops on Cororo were back aboard their ships by mid-morning. By 3:30 p.m., the 11th Marines had returned from a routine approach drill. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Clark was inspecting the condition of landing boats on the Fuller and replacing damaged propellers when he was summoned to a planning session with Admiral Turner aboard the Macaulay. It was one of the most unpleasant meetings he experienced during the war. The new beachmaster of Transport Group 62.1 recalled Turner's frustration over the previous day's performance, showcasing the harsh demeanor that earned him the nickname Terrible Turner. Turner blamed ship captains for the large number of mechanical failures and demanded immediate repairs. He also criticized the slow pace of ship-to-shore movements, expressing dissatisfaction that even a 50% time reduction wasn't good enough. He ordered transport captains to speed up troop transfers and report the timing of boat launches, arrivals at the departure line, and landings. The July 30th drill was originally supposed to replicate the July 28th landings, with live naval and aerial bombardment. Turner altered this plan so that waves of Marines would only approach to within 2,000 yards of shore and then return to the transports. Green Beach was removed from the drill plan. Naval bombardment was assigned to 3 cruisers and 4 destroyers off Red Beach, while 5 minesweepers were to fire near Nola Point. 2 destroyers and a cruiser were to fire off Blue Beach. Simultaneously, 3 aircraft carriers would launch 32 fighters and 51 dive bombers to strike Nola Point and the North Shore. Flight operations began on the 30th and were considered a success by the carrier commanders, as aircraft struck their targets effectively, blasting coral and churning sand. According to a war correspondent on the Enterprise, Turner shifted the start of naval gunfire to 8:55 a.m., despite the H-hour being moved to 10:30 a.m. Everything went smoothly at Blue Beach, including the landing approach and shore bombardment. The Navy fired 123 rounds at Cororo, while landing boats closed in to 2,000 yards before pulling back. However, things went wrong at Red Beach. Captain Weiss of the Fuller had not been informed that troops weren't supposed to land or that the drill's start time had changed. As a result, the first group of Marines was already scrambling ashore by 10 a.m. The destroyer USS Ellet, which served as control ship for the Red Beach drill, had to approach dangerously close to the shore to alert the troops to leave. The second wave commander received the message and ordered a retreat, using voice and hand signals to instruct the first wave boats to extract the men and move parallel to shore. Many Marines remained stranded. The scheduled bombardment had to be postponed until late afternoon, when it was hoped the remaining men could be evacuated just in time. Complications continued as some boats didn't reach the 2,000-yard line until as late as 12:30 p.m., with later waves arriving by 1 p.m. The delays increased the risk of accidental exposure to bombardment. When it became clear the Marines wouldn't be evacuated until the following day, the planned naval bombardment was canceled. All the stranded troops were back aboard their transports by 5 p.m. on July 31st. Some had a harder time rejoining than others. Several boats carrying the 11th and 5th Marines had to chase down transports already moving away. One Marine on a Higgins boat noted the Navy seemed in such a rush that they'd have left their own grandmothers behind if it meant a quicker departure. The officers who took part in Operation Dovetail were left disappointed. Lieutenant Sam Griffith, executive officer of the 1st Raider Battalion, said it was the only time he saw General Vandegrift visibly shaken after an operation. In his 1948 autobiography, the general called the Cororo Rehearsal a complete failure. He wrote that he dreaded to think what might have happened had the beaches been defended. Captain William Hawkins of the 1st Battalion, 5th Marines, echoed these views. Having participated in both Cororo and the Guadalcanal landing, he believed the Marines would have been slaughtered if Cororo had been in Japanese hands. The poor choice of a coral-ringed island was a major cause of the exercise's failure, and Admiral Turner bore full responsibility for the decision. The mechanical problems with the landing craft and jeeps were another key factor. Fortunately, many damaged vessels were repaired in time for the Guadalcanal operation, and only a few Higgins and ramp boats were permanently lost. Inexperienced boat crews and slow ship-to-shore operations further delayed the drills, creating at least a 3-hour lag. Operation Dovetail exposed how underdeveloped American coordination between air, sea, and amphibious units still was in 1942. The Cororo Rehearsal revealed how poor reconnaissance affected the accuracy of American air and naval attacks during the Guadalcanal campaign. Despite its flaws, the exercise offered valuable training. Many company and battalion-level Marine officers gained their first experience in ship-to-shore embarkation. It also highlighted the urgent need for better communication in coordinated operations involving land, sea, and air forces. Between the end of Operation Dovetail and the start of the Guadalcanal landings, improvements were made in loading and unloading supplies. Most importantly, the July 30th drill led to the creation of a mechanism that consolidated landing craft to ensure assault waves wouldn't be delayed due to broken or missing boats.